Soulmates. What do you think about them?
I've been pondering this for a while and I'm thinking about,
Do they really have to be?
do I want to spend my time and effort here?
Do people need connections though?
Everything is impermanent because everything ends.
Welcome to The Human Exchange, a platform where we want to have real, raw, and relevant conversations on all things performance, potential, and purpose in both our professional and personal lives. Here at The Human Exchange, or THX for short, I'm interested to engage with humans, not just experts. And today I've got a really interesting human in front of me. We've got Melissa. Now, Melissa, I feel like I need to talk you up a little bit because you're probably one of the highest profile, if not the most highest profile guests here. You know, Melissa, former Asia's Next Top Model, current TV personality, sustainability advocate, blah, 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 blah. I'm just so glad that you're here, Melissa. And Melissa, before we jump into it, make anything you want to add for the audience to get to know you a little bit better.
Okay. So John and I have been friends since we were in high school, and you've seen me through many iterations, and I'm so glad that we're still here friends. Yeah, I use my platform to speak about sustainability, but more importantly, how it connects us and our human experience to the world around us and to each other as well. So more recently, my interest has been into connection and human relationships and how that affects how we see ourselves and how we connect to the world around us and how we take care of each other and our common home.
So on that note, soulmates, what do you think about them?
Okay, so we're picking up this conversation. We had such a good deep dive together, and I'm so glad we're putting it here. I think we all understand the concept of soulmates and how important that is to our lives. But that's because of the way that has been framed in media, Hollywood, you know, building up this romanticized version of how it must be a romantic partner. You're going to have one for life. And no matter what, to have a fulfilling life, you must find that person. So the concept of a soulmate gets built up in expectation that it gets lumped into one single person. But as, you know, I progress through life and, you know, we're both in our 30s now, we start to really see the flaws behind that concept, or maybe the misconceptions and how that damages how we see our human relationships.
Yep. When I think of obviously soulmates, like you mentioned, is very ingrained in people's minds, and I guess the way they would understand what a soulmate means is a life partner, somebody you get married to your spouse, and that is like, if we were to rank relationships, that's kind of like the pinnacle of all relationships, or that's like the most important person in your life, and they should be, right, if you make a lifelong commitment to them. But do you find that could be, I don't know what word to use, but inadequate? Like, is that too much expectation to place on just one person to fulfill our need for human connection? I don't know. What are your thoughts behind that?
Yeah, it's kind of like 0 to 1. You either have it or you don't, and that is so much at stake. Like, if you don't have that, you don't have a meaningful life.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, if in a world of 8 billion people, can you find that one soulmate? I would argue that maybe you have many. And that isn't just in a romantic partner. It is also the people who are meant to journey with you throughout your life, to play really important roles in your life. And that could be multiple people. And it doesn't even have to be for the whole of your life, but know that they have a purpose to be with you, to teach you something, to support you. And isn't that a beautiful thing, that the next most important person in your life could be just around the corner? You just haven't met them yet, and you're going to meet multiple.
That's going to be, I guess, going against the grain a little bit into how we understand relationships, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, because you mentioned that soulmates may not necessarily be a singular person, because I think for the most part we understand a soulmate is somebody where I find all my needs in, my romantic needs, my my leisure needs, my physical needs, my emotional needs. But I guess what you're trying to, if I read you correctly, if I hear what you're saying, are you suggesting that different needs can be met by different people at different points of time? Like some people, they say like your wife or your husband should be your best friend.
Yeah.
Do they really have to be? Because yes, you have that closeness and that intimacy, but I would do wonder whether that's enough to go on. Like in just having that one person as a source of your everything, or should we take a more balanced and holistic view of relationships where yes, my spouse still features prominently and takes priority in my life, but I don't necessarily need to get all my connection needs or my whatever other things from my spouse, and that can be found in different people in different points of my life.
Okay. Um, so one of my favorite shows, The Mindy Project, is written by Mindy Kaling from The Office. And there was this one line that she likes to throw out. Best friend is a tier, Danny, not a person.
Wow, that's interesting. Never really thought about that.
Yeah. So same with that whole thing of collapsing it into one person and pedestaling them, putting all that expectation and all that weight of meeting all your emotional needs. Sometimes that's too much to bear because that person is like each of us have our own journeys to go through, our own evolutions, to find our own purpose in life and to serve those purposes. That person's purpose might not be to be your soulmate, to meet all your needs, because it really honestly sounds like a full-time job.
Yep.
If you were to just concentrate that into one human being. And, when we used to live, in stronger communities where that attention, where that support, where that well-being can be distributed amongst many people playing many different roles, that network effect is, a lot more stable.
Yeah.
A lot more, the foundations are a lot stronger because they're not concentrated in one person. And now that we're, concentrated into nuclear families instead of communities, I guess that goes hand in hand in why this concept of soulmate even came about and became even more centralized in our minds.
Yep. You mentioned the word communities, and that word just kind of like reminded me of the reality that we live in this day and age where, we are so highly connected. We are more mobile than we used to be. Like, you want to go anywhere in the world right now, it's so much more accessible compared to before. And we're so connected, right? You can reach like literally almost anybody. You could send a message to anyone, whether they respond or not is a different thing altogether, right? But there's so much connectivity, but yet so little connectedness, isn't there? And I find that it's actually more difficult to develop meaningful relationships. Would you agree on that?
You're right. There are lots of touch points.
Yeah,
now,
touch points. That's a good word.
and a lot of access. I could reach someone from across the world. But what is the quality of that interaction? Like, is a comment on a reel enough to develop a meaningful relationship? So I would throw the question back to you, John. Like, when was the last time you had a really deep, meaningful conversation? It doesn't matter whether it's with a friend, with a stranger, or whoever. Like, what was the quality of that conversation?
Yep. Yep. And I think what determines a quality of a conversation is not just the content of it, but there's so many factors, right? So I'm a bit old school. I still, I have no problem hopping onto a call or texting somebody, but I still like that connectedness that you have that you can't get or virtually, as compared to when you're sitting across from someone. You're engaging with them. You can see them. You can read their body language, and that to me translates to quality, a quality conversation or quality connection. And yeah, I find that that is maybe it's because of my nature. I'm a bit more. I tend to be a bit picky. You know, I think a lot, so that I speak a lot. But I find that there are very few people that I've come across in life that would want to deep dive into certain things. That would want to actually go to that kind of depth. So I do wonder whether it's because we're so used to an environment where we're just hovering over the surface. You know, where, like you said, the short form. So we are engaging with a lot of people across multiple touch points on a shallow level. But personally, I don't know. I find that it's difficult to find people who are willing to go deeper than that, to actually have that kind of connection, which would result in quality conversations. But you can have a once-off quality conversation, but to develop a quality relationship, that frequency of quality conversation needs to be more, right? But I don't know. I just find that maybe it's the realities of life, or maybe it's just people, is a lost art. I don't know. I don't find it happening a lot with people. That's my experience, at least.
Yeah, I think you've really broken down the process very nicely there. You kind of need the building blocks to to build up to a meaningful relationship, and it starts with connection. So how come you can have a really deep, meaningful conversation with a stranger and never see them again?
Mm,
But you could see someone over and over again and never actually develop a deep relationship.
mm,
So I think, like you said, it's a lost art. How do you deeply connect with a person, no matter how short or long the time frame that you have together? We're all skirting around the surface, likes, comments, or even if you think about the way that we're interacting en masse nowadays, if you
yep.
walk into a room, there's 100 people there. We're doing the hi, I'm this, hi, I'm that, hi, what do you do? What do I do? Hi. And it's very transactional, it's very rapid pace, it's very focused on volume over value.
So
And,
true.
it's very transactional.
Mm.
And that's why we're not building up to these deep, meaningful relationships, because now we're all scarce in time. And we also have this pressure to, okay, how do I make the most out of my time? How do I be the most productive? How do I meet as many strangers to network? And when you come in with that transactional nature already, it is very hard to build up to a deep, meaningful relationship. And then no wonder, no matter how much work you put in, or, supposed work that you think you're putting in, it doesn't translate. So actually, it's to kind of pull back and see, wait, how can I do this differently? So, I've been pondering this for a while, and I'm thinking about, why does a conversation with a stranger, even no matter how short or long, could be deeply meaningful, where some people, like you say, won't drop down with me into, a deep dive.
Mm,
And it's presence.
mm,
Sometimes when we're with each other, we're actually still multitasking.
mm,
Before you finish your sentence, I'm already thinking, what is the next thing I can say to impress you? What is the next thing that I can say to reply to what you want to say?
yep.
And I've actually taken myself out of that moment. So I I remember I couldn't really quite pin it down, but I was having this conversation with an old old primary school friend. And we don't hang out, but when we see each other, there's something about the quality that he brings in, which is like, he just holds really deep presence.
Mm,
And therefore, you're both able to drop down much quicker.
mm,
And whatever that you talk about is going to be a lot deeper, even if it might just be a 5-minute conversation.
yep. Yep. And that takes a lot of intentionality, because I am thinking about what we are used to, that whole touch and go transactional nature. Like when we interact with things on social media, and I'm not trying to demonize social media, but I think it does play a huge factor into our psyche and into our habits, because with social media, it's like, if you see something you don't like the first 5 seconds of it, scroll away. If I'm looking at something, it doesn't interest me, in the first 3 seconds, I move on to the next thing. But whereas we could subconsciously do that with a person, right? We're not present with the person. We're not really soaking that moment in. Because you mentioned being present, and then I talked about how, yeah, you really have to be intentional, because every point of time, social media, it just makes you like scroll here, scroll there.
Yeah, you're right. And it's always like you're chasing the next dopamine hit,
Yep.
right? And even as you schedule our days, that is what it is. What is the next thing I have to do? What is the next thing I have to do? So your mind is always jumping into the future. And it's almost like a meditative process to bring yourself back to the present moment and be able to be here with that person, to even allow a pause instead of both of us just trying to fill up the space, fill up the empty space with words and thoughts and whatever, instead of building a connection.
Yeah. Do people need connections though? Or maybe let me make it even, let me break it down even further. Do we need more friends? Like, is there a need for it? Or like, what's the benefit of having all these meaningful connections or different relationships or friendships? Do people need that? What do you think?
I mean, that's a rhetorical question, right? Obviously, we need it. We're all sick because we have been starved of it. We live in a world, a late stage capitalist world now, where everything is transactional, everything is about chasing dopamine, everything's about consuming. And the system programs us this way because it is built in a way where we have removed a lot of our human connections, or at least made them very shallow.
Yep.
So when we've always got this hole within us that isn't being nourished by connection, by relationships, that's why we get to fill it up with addiction. We get to fill it up with, overconsumption, and all of these vices that society has brought us, because we are all trying to fill a hole that only connection can fill.
I don't know about you, but I find it difficult, or more difficult at least, to develop meaningful relationships as I get older. Do you want to speak a little bit into that?
Wow, John, like you as a former pastor, if you're finding it difficult to form meaningful relationships, what about the rest of us? I mean, the thing about friendships is that they often the thing about friendships is it's often deprioritized compared to everything else.
Yep.
People prioritize chasing money, chasing career, and building a family. And friendships take the leftovers of your schedule. But like anything that you take care of, it needs to be scheduled in, it needs to be made a priority in your life for it to be able to blossom. If we keep giving it the leftovers, how are we expecting them to be strong?
Yep. And that's, I mean, when you point it back to, hey, you used to be, in an environment where you interact with a lot of people. I think proximity makes a big difference.
Yeah.
So if you are in if you go to a regular thing, like for example, a club or a church, or even a temple or a mosque, like if you go there regularly, you see the same bunch of people, it definitely keeps, it makes it easier to remain connected to that same group of people. But the reality is we also live in a very transient society, because we move on to the next thing, we get a new job, or we change career directions, which needs us to move geographically. So like we're always moving around. So I think that's one of the things that kind of like makes us lose that proximity. Now that proximity was supposed to be replaced by wow, this is challenging. It's gonna make the editing challenging also. Yeah. Now that proximity was supposed to be, the need for proximity was supposed to be mitigated or replaced by connectedness. But I find that even though you are so connected to people, it's just really not the same. So I think proximity matters a lot. But I don't know, it's like maybe just finding, I mean, time is a thing, a big thing. When you're married, you've got kids, you've got a full-time job, that's just taking up all your time. So yes, in a sense, friendships do get your leftovers, but I also find it's not easy finding people of the same interests. So I don't know, like, if I were to ask your advice, how do I find somebody with the same interests as me? Like, what kind of pointers would you give to that person, or to give to me?
Maybe it isn't framed as this. Maybe if we don't frame it as the same interests, we can frame it as the same values.
That's a great one. Values. Yeah.
Yeah. So why do I gravitate to you? Why do you gravitate? Why are we still friends 20 years later? We don't spend a lot of time together, John. But we're still able to maintain a connection because I think to some extent we do have the same values. And interests are a great way to bring people together so that they can connect. At first, it's like a version of small talk.
Yeah.
Oh, you like football? I also like football.
Yeah.
It's small talk in activity form. But then after that, the ones that you're really going to connect to are the people with the same values. If you had all your football kakis, the ones that you're actually going to build a longer relationship and friendship with out of 20, I don't know how many people play football, but out of 20 people is 2.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we want to focus on. So while you can cast the net far and wide, through interest groups, through book clubs, through your religious place of worship, in the end, I think your heart knows when you find someone that vibes with you that way because you share the same values.
That's such a it's such a clear and distinctive way of putting it, right? It's like almost like a funnel where you start with interest first, but then how you really learn to develop deeper, or whether you decide to develop a deeper connection with somebody, is when they share the same values. But when we talk about values, I don't know, you know, as an individual myself, you know, I've gone through a personal evolution of sorts, right? And when I go through different transitions and iterations of who I am and all that, I find that my values change. So my question to you is, if you find yourself in a place where maybe you used to relate to a person really well, but your values and that person's values no longer align, what happens? I don't know, is there such a thing as friendship breakups, connection breakup? I don't know. What do you think?
I guess with friendships, oftentimes there isn't a hard breakup. I think it's because with romantic partnerships, a breakup is necessary in most cases before you begin a new one.
Both cases.
Unless you're in ethical non-monogamy.
Yeah.
Whereas a friendship is like, you can play the volume game. You can have as many friends as you want. There's no possessiveness in it and there's no exclusivity in it. So sometimes when you can maintain several at once, and therefore sometimes all it takes is just you drifting apart for there to be not a breakup, but kind of a breakup. And sometimes it's only when one person has wronged the other or they've just shifted out of alignment, then there might be a hard stop breakup. But is that really such a bad thing? It doesn't actually it doesn't always take away from the sanctity or the meaning of that relationship, because everything ends, everything is impermanent. Even a marriage or your one soulmate is impermanent because, a relationship might end or one of them dies. So all relationships end, but it doesn't take away from what it means. So if that friendship is meant to last only until that time, then all you do is say goodbye to it and thank it for all that it's done for you, because it has served you so well during that season of your life. And now you both journey separately.
I like the way you put it, and but I want to get a little bit play devil's advocate a little bit, or get a bit more practical on that. If you were to feel, because that's a natural thing that people would do, right? So if they feel like, I can't really vibe with you anymore, or I feel like we're not really on the same page, the natural thing to do is, like, I will just interact with you less and less, and then eventually maybe not at all. So that's kind of like a natural, let nature takes its course kind of thing, right? But what happens in a situation where maybe one person still feels like they want to nurture their relationship, but the other person does not feel the same? Do you feel like there should be some form of clarity, and, like, even if they do, like, how do you put it? It's such an awkward thing, isn't it? But it's something that I guess we don't really talk about it often, but is it really okay to tell somebody, hey, you know what? I think this is not working out. Maybe we should take a break. I don't know. Have you ever experienced anything like that for yourself? Like,
Wow. You're right. There's no guidebook to how to break up with a friend. Actually, there's no guidebook. Or we often don't follow the guidebook for how to even break up with a romantic relationship.
yep, that's true.
That's why we do the cowardice way of like ghosting, not cowardice, the fear-based way of ghosting, of cheating, of this or that, just to be able to exit a relationship. It takes courage to have a hard conversation.
Yeah.
And I think we all tend to avoid that. And it's a practice and it doesn't get less uncomfortable. Difficult conversations are meant to be uncomfortable, but you kind of have to power through that and show up as honestly and authentically with each other so that there can be clarity and truth. I've actually had friendships that were in its own way kind by saying, hey, this is the end of our relationship. I can no longer be your friend and I wish it could be different, but you know, I don't want to leave you hanging thinking, why am I ghosting you? Let me just tell you now, and then we can just peacefully like close this chapter and part ways.
So you've had a situation where you had to have a conversation with somebody before.
Yeah, absolutely. They had the conversation with me. So they broke up with me.
Oh.
Yeah, they broke up with me. And I'm so grateful for that.
Mm.
Like, is it unkind? No, actually, it's incredibly kind to give me clarity. Instead of the slow ghosting, the disappearing, the this and that. But I would say it takes courage and practice to be able to have a conversation like that.
Yeah, it takes a lot of courage and a lot of self-awareness also, you know, in a sense, because you want to articulate. I think a lot of times, in order to be kind, you don't want to make it seem so personal or it's like a personal attack of sorts, right? And I think that kind of choosing the right words, having the right posture, but also being prepared for the person's reaction, that takes a lot of maturity, a lot of courage to do that. And I think there's schools for so many things, right? They have lessons on how you should manage finance, how to develop skills, how to build your career, how to run a business, but there are not that many schools or lessons on how do you actually be human, how do you actually have relationships, how do you navigate some of these difficult conversations. And I think it's, you know, it's an art and it's a thing that we need to be more mindful of, you know. But I find that, yes, I agree with you that clarity is so important, because for me, I've done both, you know. I've been on both ends. I have kind of like ghosted people before, you know. I think we've all done it, where he's just kind of like, well, out of sight, out of mind, you know. And I guess the impact of me ghosting you is not so high because I don't see you that much anyway. So I just kind of like whatever. But I've also been on the other end where, you know, people who I thought, you know, we had a good thing going. You know, I've been friends with you for many, many years. But you start to see that change, you know, where they get a bit, they take longer to reply, or some is even more drastic, you know, maybe they got low self-awareness, like when you actually see them, their body language and the way they, you know, talk to you is totally different. But that's where I had to have my own courage to admit that, hey, I think this person doesn't want to be my friend anymore. Because sometimes when we admit things like that, we tend to take the blame on ourselves. Maybe we start to go, am I not a good friend? Or am I not valuable or worthy enough for your friendship? But like you mentioned, there are times where people just grow and people move on. And I think it's a part of life that we have to accept when it comes to relationships, and we just don't take it personally.
Yeah. And I think those moments are a gift. Like for it to actually shine a light on the scary parts of that relationship that was never shown to you before also shows you where you should redirect.
Yeah.
Like it takes effort to maintain a friendship and a relationship. So the fact that these things can come up and then just show you the truth of what that relationship is and its shortfalls, then also gives you the ability to decide, do I want to spend my time and effort here, or can I invest it in someone better?
Yeah.
Not better, but like in something that is more aligned for the both of us.
Yeah. And it goes back to that thought where the end of something can always mean the beginning of something else, right? And we've already established that your life is busy, schedules are full. So if you do not, so if you wanna, if a person doesn't necessarily want to spend any more time with you, it's a loss in the short term, but it could be a win in the longer term, because then maybe you have time to invest in other connections, or to invest in yourself, or whatever. But I think there is a certain sense where we tend to find comfort in longevity. Growing up, one of my favorite shows was Friends. That show, the sitcom, where you've got 6 people who live in close proximity to one another. They even end up dating each other and having kids with one another, but they're just like lifelong friends. And I think for a long time that gave me an image of the perfect community or perfect friendship, where you journey for a long period of time, you go through different milestones together, and then that's what an ideal friendship should be. But I begin to realize, as you mentioned, like life, that is permanent in life. But just because something is not permanent doesn't mean that there's no beauty or value in it. And friends are friends for a season, and sometimes friends stop being friends for different reasons. So I think it's having that kind of mindset and that kind of understanding that will perhaps then make us more prepared to invest in relationships and to form meaningful connections.
Yeah. It's like not attaching yourself to an outcome. Like I invest in this, but only if it lasts forever? Well, no, not really. I'm going to get so much from this, and I'm also going to be able to give so much to you, whether our friendship is for a month or for life.
That's counterintuitive though, don't you think? Because when you are developing a career or you're building a business or whatever, they always tell you got to think about the ROI, the outcome. But now what you're saying is like with relationships, maybe that's not like the best approach, isn't it? Like, let's not think about the outcome, but let's build on the moment, build on the moments that we have each other, and see where it takes us. I don't know, is that kind of like what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, because isn't like life made up of moments rather than your payoffs at the end? Life is made out of moments, and we've created something beautiful together. So think about like, sometimes with friendships, we often like want to sustain something long past its expiry date. For example, like I used to live abroad in pockets, and then we'd all be in the same community, and we'd all have the proximity, and we'd all invest into the experience together. So say for 3 months, we're the best of friends, we're roommates, we're everything. We're able to support each other through that time, and then we built really beautiful memories. But the moment we're away, we don't talk to each other anymore. And that's okay. Because it served its purpose for that time, and it doesn't mean it was less meaningful. It just means that we're not in alignment anymore.
Do you think it's necessary to be friends with the people you work with? What are your thoughts about that?
I think it enriches work, but not everyone is going to have that all the time. I think, there's a potential for friendship anywhere. And sometimes I know some people tend to compartmentalize. You are a colleague, not a friend.
Yep.
But wouldn't it be funner if they were a friend? Because it also means, hey, I have your back, you have mine. Hey, we're invested in each other.
Provided you have the same value, right?
We have the same values. If I care about you and you care about me, and work is hard enough, if we're on the same team, not just physically on the same team, but we're on each other's teams, wouldn't that make work so much lighter?
Yep. And I think that's where we have to discern or distinguish whether that person is on the same page as us in terms of values, because in a work environment, I mean, sometimes it's brutal, right? Some people, they only have your best interest at heart as long as it aligns with their own interests. You know, what I mean by that is like, well, I will invest in you because you're on my team. So I only care about you because of your contribution to the team or to the project.
Yeah.
But whether I care about you as an individual, you know, that remains to be seen, right? So I think and work is where we spend. If you're a full-time employed, that's where you spend most of your time anyway. So I think that's kind of like the tricky part as well. Why some people find it difficult to build connections, because they're not really sure. Hey, the people at work, if if I mess up at work, will they still be my friend? Or if I leave this company, will they still be my friend? I think that's a dynamic that people have to kind of like work around or navigate, which leads me to wonder, do you think boundaries are needed in developing friendships or meaningful connections? And if yes, what kind of boundaries should we draw? I don't know, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, like, as a recovering people pleaser, I definitely like resonate with that. Yeah, it's so hard to define our own, for a lot of us, like, I feel like it's very hard to define our own boundaries. And that's why people can walk all over them, because we have not enforced it for ourselves in the first place. So, I mean, I've had it pointed out before that, wow, this relationship that you have is so close to the point of enmeshment, that is actually unhealthy in some ways, because he walks all over your boundaries. But it's not because he is doing it on purpose, it's because you never held them in the first place. So I feel we're kind of like messing our way through life. We learn from mistakes. And it's not that, oh, this should have or should have not. I think sometimes they're only tested when you fall into a bad place. Like, oh, I was supposed to have boundaries. Cool. And then you learn from there. As much as we like to have a checklist of what is healthy and what is not, sometimes only a lived experience can give you that lesson.
Yep. Hey everybody, taking a moment from our conversation to tell you that this episode is actually sponsored by our partners, Medicos. Now, I personally don't really like wearing masks, but when I need to, I go to no other brand except Medicos, because I find that they are the most comfortable, but they also offer the most protection compared to all other masks in the market. Now, in front of me here, I got the M99 Flip range, which is designed for comfort. It is something that you can wear all day at the mall, in the office, and you can even speak through it. It's 5-ply, so really, really designed for comfort. For this range, you can find it on their online store, Medicos online store, or all their e-commerce platforms, Lazada and Shopee. Now, back to the episode. And we've kind of like gone swing from one extreme to the other often, right? Because there's this whole thought of like, well, you have to establish all your boundaries, right? You have to kind of like draw clear lines, like this is what you would talk about, this is what you will not talk about, and then kind of like put it all at the front, at the beginning, and what happens with that is that before you even get the opportunity to connect with somebody, you've really got all these walls up, right? But I think some of it is, like you mentioned, it's lived experience, right? And each connection you make will be different, because there are some people where you will feel more comfortable talking about certain things, but there are other people you may not feel so comfortable talking about the same thing that you did with the other person. And I think it's actually kind of like a true connection, or a genuine, valuable connection. They will respect you. If you were to tell them, hey, I would prefer that we do not discuss this, instead of perceiving it as a lack of trust, or why don't you trust me? Why don't you want to tell me? But it would be like, okay, I get it, right? This is not something that you want to talk about just yet. And so that there's that honesty, and there's a genuine and mutual respect for one another that's so necessary, which again, I go back to, I know I sound like some boomer hating on like social media, but I think that's something that is lost on social media because you got no filter. You can essentially say whatever the heck you want to say, comment whatever you want to say, and the consequences of that is not immediately felt. Versus if I were to push, if I were to say something unkind to you face to face, or if you were to already say stop it right there and I were to push more, I will now have to see your face change, your body, your body posture shift, and I will bear the immediate consequence. Or you may even retaliate. Whereas online, I can just say something mean, just turn my phone off and not delete the app and not worry anymore. So I think like that's something that it's an art that's beginning, that is still developing, but at the same time diminishing at the same time, human connection. So I feel that there's so much work that we still need to put into it.
For sure, because it's a messy, iterative, like humans are messy.
Yeah.
And connection is an iterative process. It's almost like, hey, I'm doing this. Like, how do you respond? This is how much I want to divulge. How much will you reciprocate? We're figuring it out live as we go along. And then after that, you build the power of discernment, right? Because you have enough case studies from the past of all these events for you to see, oh, how will I behave in this dynamic? And what is the healthiest form of it between the both of us? And you're right, like social media doesn't quite allow that. Not all the time. That's why you see a lot of also oversharing sometimes on social media, trauma dumping on social media. And sometimes the person might not be aware why they're doing this.
Mm. Mm. Do you think that in order to develop meaningful connections, apart from nurturing those connections itself, we also need to put a bit of work within ourselves? Because why I asked that was where you mentioned the word trauma dumping. I find that usually happens where maybe the person lacks that kind of self-awareness, which could maybe be a result of not processing some of the pain and all that. Because when we talked about having that soulmate, that one singular person, I think sometimes we expect our partner or our spouse to be everything to us, like therapists, hobbies, counselor, lover, and that could be extremely burdensome on the person and unrealistic. And maybe the person does not have that kind of skill set or qualification. Like, for example, there could be certain things in your life where maybe you need to actually process it with a therapist, or maybe it's better if you actually process it with somebody else who could be objective, or maybe they had the experience and a skill set. And when you do that, you need to do a bit of work. You need to look into yourself and see what are areas that you need to work on, and then look for those different avenues. So I don't know, like self-work seems to be, like, as I'm talking, it just seems to me that self-work is equally important in developing meaningful connections.
For sure. And actually meaningful connections would be a key part of knowing yourself. Your partner is only going to see one version of you, and you are many colors of the rainbow. Like, you are actually a almost different self when you're with your best friend, when you're with a stranger, when you're with your partner. And that person's also going to be able to help reflect things back at you because they see that version of you. They see the blind spots. They are able to step back and be objective. And sometimes a partner has a lot of skin in the game. What you are is almost like, because you are their partner, sometimes that skin in the game also means that I require you to be a certain way. Some relationships can have that expectations. So sometimes when you go against that, it's a little harder to accept or to forgive or to whatever, because it reflects on their identity. Whereas, different sorts of friendships could have that space to be deeply invested in you, but still be able to not take it personally. I think with you and I, for example, our connection has spanned 20 years, and you are one of those people who just show up in my times of crisis but with radical acceptance, no matter what that shit I do. Because like me being your friend, being someone who perhaps did a bad thing, it doesn't reflect on you. Or you're not going to take it as personally because it isn't like, oh, John is the friend of this kind of person.
Why do you think that's lacking? Like I feel that's lacking, that radical acceptance, because or is it rather just a mental barrier that we put within ourselves, like, oh, that person wouldn't accept me because of this? Like, do you find that there is a lack of, or there could be more acceptance amongst people, and what do you think is driving that, or what's behind that?
Yeah, I mean, like, judgment is like a national sport, right? We feel better about ourselves when we judge other people, when we tear other people down. And that usually comes from a place of low self-worth in the first place, right? So in order to make ourselves feel better, I need to tear someone else down. But again, self-awareness, you need to build a sense of self-awareness to even see why you're doing these things and how do you step away from that. I guess, like what we were talking about earlier, acceptance is usually not freely given out, and then we tend to shy away from being vulnerable with other people because we have experienced judgment in the past from other people. And then that creates that fear response of like, oh my God, if I show you this part of me, will you actually accept it? And then now we put on different masks and not be our true selves with other people. And then that becomes a barrier to connection.
Yep. And I like what you said about judgment being a national sport, because I find that judgment is also the usual automatic response that we have, because you see, it's human beings, I believe. I'm not a psychologist, I'm not an expert in psychology, but I've perceived through observation of human behavior that people gravitate towards comfort, and what brings them comfort is what makes sense to them. So if something makes sense to me, that's comfortable, non-threatening. And in order to get to that stage, it's easier for me to categorize people. So, for example, if I have a certain stereotype, like random stereotype, like people with tattoos are bad. So if I see a person with tattoos, that's how I would immediately view that lens. View that with that lens. Okay, you must be. You may not be bad, but you are somebody that I'm going to have high guard against. However, if people that are like me, maybe they come from the same background, they speak the same language, then I would view them with a clearer lens, because that gives me security, that gives me comfort. And what I find is that if we want to develop meaningful connections and really be human to one another, we have to not destroy those biases or those lenses, but to actively challenge them and to question, is it really that? Is it really that? Because I think those categories and those lenses is still helpful. Like that's how we are. That's how we are wired. But it's that, again, that mindfulness. And mindfulness is not always inaction. Mindfulness is sometimes being really intentional in recognizing, hey, these are some of the biases I have, and I feel them activating, but can I move past this bias to be in that moment with this person and see where it goes?
Yeah. And like curiosity can lead you to beautiful spaces.
Yep.
Like these are all just like almost like nonsensical things, how we categorize each other and make judgments without actually knowing the person underneath. And then we might question back, oh, why people don't understand me? Why people don't allow me to be my full self and want to judge me? It was like, okay, but we're just spinning this wheel of judgment around. So why not break the stalemate and then be the first one to pause in that moment, relax all judgment, and then see where it takes you in whatever conversation that you're going forth with.
I want to go back to something that we explored earlier, where I asked you, so do we really need friends? Do we really need this human connection that you mentioned that we do, because we're starved of it? And the reason why you would say that we're starved of it is because of the different social ills or ailments that we feel. But beyond that, like if I were to give you down the space to be an advocate for friendship, for connections, what would you say?
I mean, okay, why do sitcoms like Friends and How I Met Your Mother resonate with us so much? It's because sometimes an experience is amplified when it is shared.
Mm.
You could see the most beautiful sunset and you're like, wow. But you know what will make it feel better? When your friend's right beside you and you're like, did you see that?
Yep.
And you create these core memories together. If you think about all your core memories, I bet there was a friend there. There was another person there that you cared about a lot. And that made it meaningful. So, we're meaning-making machines, and our relationships and friendships are part of that. In fact, they are very core parts of that. So the same way why we would probably not watch a sitcom about a loner who's just going about their routine over and over again, living life in isolation. We want to watch a group of friends and their different dynamics and their tips, their makeups, their this, their that, as they evolve and journey together. Why have these sitcoms, stuck around in our minds? Because that's what we would want for ourselves as well. And the thing that we most often hear is like, oh, as I grow older, I have less and less friends. And then we might reframe that to no lah, quality over quantity, which is absolutely true, but it also does not have to mean one or the other. You can have a little bit more quantity with quality still. Because I'm a former risk manager. And if I think about concentration risk, if your one friend dies, what will you be left with?
Yeah. That's an interesting way to put it. And quantity over quality. I guess what I'm wondering is, I don't know, are there any practical handles or tips you could give to someone who, maybe two types of people, right? One, I'm already so busy. I'm struggling to nurture my friendships. How will you advise this person? And another person would be, I'm so busy, I don't even have time to meet people. I don't even have time for myself. How do I even start building relationships? What are the things you would tell these two different people?
Yeah, so in the demands of the modern world, I find what works for me is a couple of things. So we have to tend to be a bit more creative in our adult lives compared to when we were kids, because we had proximity and school forcing us to be together for hours every single day. And that was the foundations of our friendship. I was reading this thing about how the best way to build a friendship, and a very crucial part of friendship, is to do nothing together, to just be, to be able to be spontaneous, to allocate the time for it, where you and I can just see where the day leads, rather than, oh, from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock, I'm having lunch with you and that's it. And then what we're doing is I update you on my life, you update me on life, and then bye. We're not actually creating new memories together. We're just kind of doing some sort of reporting to each other, and that's about it. So a couple of things that I find really helpful is to schedule time in to do nothing together. And how you can bundle that out with productivity is to do things that both of you have to get done. So I like to lean on the errand, something I call the errand hang. We're hanging out, doing errands together. You need groceries, I need groceries, great. Instead of doing that in isolation, we're getting something done that we need to schedule in, but we get some free flow time between us as well. Another thing I like to do is accountability. So, hey, what are your goals? What are mine? So it might be to read a book and be able to share that with each other. So we can set time apart, and it is still productive because it is still serving your interests and where you want to go in self-development, but you're sharing that experience with a friend. So now we're intentionally creating new experiences together that still fit in with our other goals like self-development and errands, but we're cementing the friendship and deepening it.
You're creating opportunity for proximity, which in turns makes it easier for connection. That's what we're doing, right? We're bringing we're trying to, as much as possible, find reasons to come together. I have this question though, like, what if you're trying to get deeper, for lack of a better word, with somebody, where maybe you're trying to go beyond the interest, and then you want to talk about develop, start talking about what values you have, what goals you have, but you find like you're stuck. Like you do want to go deeper with somebody, but they're just not reciprocating. Is there any tips that you can give on how you can try, like, go deeper with a person? Or is it a thing where you should keep trying? Is there any point where you should give up? I don't know. You get where I'm going with this.
I feel like certain, like, different personality types are going to fit different purposes for you. You can try, but it's not going to work with everyone, and that's okay. Sometimes certain friendships are just for activities, and that's okay. I think it's asking better questions. Sometimes we're just kind of talking at each other instead of asking better questions to allow the other person to be able to even step back and contemplate on where we're going in this conversation. That is also an art that I'm working on, asking better questions, because sometimes I feel like we're just talking and then talking and talking and talking, but not actually journeying through a conversation together. So one question that I find really helpful is to relay something that I'm going through, and then, hey, do you have any advice for me?
Yep, it's when you try and make the conversation either as much as possible about that person or draw from that person, where you're using that to build, you're using that as blocks to build a bridge across to connect with that person. But I think building goes, like you said, both ways, right? You can only build a certain bridge so far, but even if you build the entire bridge, the other person still has to make the choice to cross it with you or to come to where you are at. And I guess the reality is that not everybody wants to, or is willing to, or is ready to make this kind of step, and that's okay. So what I this conversation also really got me thinking, and it made me go back to even myself, like, what kind of expectations am I placing on people? Because sometimes you may invest a lot in a person and you may expect the person to do the same, but the reality is the person may not, right? And that's actually okay, because that whole mindset of that whole ROI and wait for to the end to enjoy the rewards. I think that's something that it's though there is a place for that, but it's not always necessarily applicable to all areas of life, especially relationships.
Maybe we can think about the contrast between why was it easy to make friends why it was easy to maintain friendships when you were younger, and then now, and what would you feel like is missing now?
To be honest, it's for me, it's really time and energy, because I actually really don't have time, because like, when you're raising a family, then you get like kids, and we don't lean on any domestic help. Like, we don't have a helper at home, and I only have my mom here. My in-laws live in Australia, so it's really the time. But I find for me, I also value that I value deeper connections more. So if I'm just only interacting with people on a very surface level, after a while I tend to lose interest. That's me personally.
So how do you define a deep connection? Or maybe think about a couple of the friendships that you have and why you choose to continue to engage in those.
I think there is a certain level of vulnerability that we afford to one another. So I'm willing to be vulnerable, and the other person is willing to be vulnerable as well. And we share that, but there is no stance of judgment, but there's also no feeling of like, now I need to fix you. Or you should do that, you should do this.
So all these are really crucial points we didn't cover. Is it actually rolling now?
I don't know. Is it
Can we pre-for? Okay. I really love what you said there, because that vulnerability conveys trust.
Yeah.
I trust you. I trust you not to judge me. I trust you not to condemn me. Therefore, I've shown you this side that I may not show anyone else.
Yeah, and it's that I think a lot of times when we offer help, or when we offer help or advice, it comes from a good place, but it also can come across as judgy, and it can also come across as, I guess, unempathetic, because one of the things that you mentioned just now about not being present is that we listen to reply rather than listen to understand. You know, we're just like, we're in a mode, such a go and do mode at the most of the time, that even when something is presented in front of us, even if it's a sharing from a friend, we're kind of like now computing and evaluating what this person is saying, rather than actually seeing the human behind this conversation. And I find that when I can have connections or interactions with people who are just simply willing to listen and to just be, and now maybe they have something helpful to say, and they say it, that's fine as well. But I think the shortfall of that is when people feel like they need to say something just because they should not stay quiet. In fact, I think it's rather that you be still and, you know, not add to it, rather than just adding to something, or to what something someone is saying for the sake of it. So I think having that kind of space and the interaction, that's valuable. I find that I enjoy that kind of no pressure, but yet let's be willing to share and be vulnerable. I find it helpful in developing deeper connection with somebody.
It's like there's an ease to the conversation, and there's an ease to the connection as well, because sometimes when you're like listening to respond, there's a performative element to it. I know the answer. I know the solution to fix all your problems. Instead of, like you were saying, practicing deep listening and allowing the person to be, leaving the space of silence in between, because more often than not, they also need a second to go, oh, wait, there's more. There's more I need to convey to you. There's more I need to share. There's more I need to unload off my chest that might even be very helpful or therapeutic for them to come up with, instead of us jumping into just, I'm going to solve your problems now.
Yeah. And maybe that's the reason why people shy away from forming deeper connections as well. Maybe there is that unspoken or subconscious pressure that they put upon themselves to feel like, okay, this person is sharing something, I must now then add to it. Versus, as long as I am there, I'm practicing deep listening, I'm present for that person, there's already value in that. So maybe that's one of the reasons why people also have the barrier. So it's not just a unrealistic expectation on others, but it's also an unrealistic expectation on yourself.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's so valuable.
And sometimes it's like we're kind of, by us not just coming in as like an overlord to solve your problems, it is literally just, oh, there's a storm right now, and I'm going to get in the boat with you.
Yep.
And then we're kind of co-navigating this. I'm not the know-it-all here. I'm actually just trying to walk with you through this process. And one of the beautiful things that I really enjoy is when it suddenly insight comes up that helps yourself as well. So I would be sharing a problem, and my friend would suddenly have an insight that helped me, but revealed something in her life as well. And we both have an aha moment together. And that's kind of like what deep listening and being present with each other can allow, rather than one trying to be a fixer in that situation.
Yep. And because we're so saturated in this hyper productivity hustle culture, we often find being present the opposite of that. What I mean by that is that, I remember when my dad passed away, this would be like quite a long time, 7, 8 years ago. one of the things that I value I value people being there for me. I value people coming to talk to me, pray with me and everything like that. But I value equally, if not more, people who just turned up. Like, cause when my dad was before he died, when he was in a coma. So when a loved one is in a coma, in ICU, there's a lot of waiting around. You're just sitting there waiting, and sometimes you don't even know why you're waiting. So I remember I had like a few friends that what they did was they turned up and they waited with me, and we just talked, and they brought a certain sense of normalcy in back into my life. But that was so precious, and that meant something. So I think having that hyper productive, like, yes, what am I going to get out of this relationship? How am I going to add to you and all that? It's not entirely helpful all the time. And it's that value of just being present, even if it means sometimes just doing nothing and going through that thing with that person.
Wow. That is like the epitome of getting in the boat with you.
Yeah.
We don't have to like achieve something here. I literally just have to be here with you and allow you to be. Like, that's my favorite term, do nothing. I always say the best way to build a friendship, do nothing together and allow that time to be.
If I were to think about, if I were to pick up anything else that we talked about, or if I gain any more insights what we talked about, it's really simply about just the art of giving, just giving to people, giving and not expecting to get back. But when you give out, you really don't know what will come back to you, because what may come back to you may surprise you. What may come back to you could be tenfold of what you're giving. But that important thing is that we keep giving, because the minute we start calculating, start putting up barriers and walls, I think that's where, yes, we protect ourselves from being hurt, but we also stop ourselves from experiencing what life can offer, or what magical, unexpected moments can come up.
Yeah. And like, thank you for bringing it there, because it isn't really just about conversation. Sometimes you can have not much conversation or surface level conversation or what seems like that, but it conveys the energy of, hey, I'm here and I'm supporting you. I'm here if you need me. Even if all you talk about is, oh, the weather, your kids, or what happened at work today. But the energy of giving is so powerful. It's like, I get the opportunity to give and you get the opportunity to give too. And that's actually a really great way to build a friendship. And this is how you actually support each other through life. One of my friends has demonstrated that so beautifully, because she connects really easily with certain people, and because she comes in with that energy of giving so strongly. Even in, the first couple of times that we hang out, she'll just, oh, what have you been into? What have you been doing? What are your goals? And then she'll just come in with, oh, I know this guy, I know that guy, and here's a resource that I can share with you, and da, da, da. And she just gives and gives and gives, and she says, no gatekeeping. I'm just gonna give, and how you reciprocate will show me how further our relationship can go.
Gatekeeping, that's a very apt and precise way to put it. That we don't want to be calculative when it comes to relationships and how much we give out. But because what the person gives back is a clear indicator of that. I wanted to ask you, what do you think about networking? Because you're an entrepreneur, yeah. You obviously have to, as an entrepreneur, as somebody who um, you have to rely on finding your own opportunity, building. Sorry, let me restart again. What are your thoughts on networking? Because I'm guessing you're an entrepreneur, and as an entrepreneur, you naturally have to find opportunities via the connections that you make. And some people, or most people, will classify that as networking. And they also say, right, that your network is your net worth. So I don't know, what are your thoughts behind networking? And yeah.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, your network is your net worth. The But I think it's like reframing what networking actually is. How is it going to bring value to you? Is the quality of the relationships within.
Yep.
It's not passing your business card out to 100 people, telling people what you do. Is to demonstrate what you can bring to the table for them as well. How can I support you, generously? And once you 5 good conversations instead of 100 business cards given out, is going to take you so much further in what you're trying to achieve in your career. Understanding how you can best help another person, how we can both win through getting to know each other, through helping each other out, having each other's interests at heart, that is where the net worth is, rather than how many people know my name.
Yeah, brilliant. Any last thoughts or final pieces of advice for the people listening in the area of connection, friendships, things that we're talking about?
We'll probably go through this list so we can do pickups along the way. But I would say your next best friend could be around the corner.
Wow.
You just haven't met them yet. And you kind of have to cultivate a sense of openness instead of guardedness to be able to meet that person. Your favorite person in this lifetime could be someone that you haven't met, or could be standing right in front of you with all the potential of the most meaningful relationship in your life, but it's still up to you to open that door. And, from what we've talked about, how do you cultivate deep connection? How do you be vulnerable with someone? How do you drip feed into a connection so that it actually builds into one that is meaningful? That takes intention, that takes time, that takes space, and you can find it if you want to. Everyone has a busy life, but friendships should take priority as well.
Great. Where can people reach you if they want to, find out more about you or interact with you?
So I'm at Hey Melissa Tan on Instagram as my primary social network, and I'm also building a community of not community. Currently, as my curiosity is going into the field of connection, friendships, and how that fulfills our life, I've also been working on building these experiences and spaces for people to build deep connection with each other, especially if you're feeling lonely, isolated, or having trouble relating to others. Again, your next best friend could be around the corner, and I hope to support you in that.
Wow. How do these experiences or spaces work? Could you give us a little bit of insight? Do you have the details on that already?
So it's something that I've been experimenting over the last 2 years. I've been in okay, so it started this way. One of my friends, super good guy, was spending more and more time at work, not because work was demanding, but because his friend group was thinning out. They were getting into relationships, they were getting married, and he didn't have people to hang out with over the weekend. That's why he was working more. So it wasn't that he wasn't just meeting people for romantic partnerships, but he didn't have the opportunity to meet more people to build friendships. So I started organizing events and just telling everyone, hey, don't bring a friend. Don't bring a social crutch. Just come and experience this thing together.
Wow.
And like 15 people showed up, had a great time, and then made actual friendships after that.
Wow.
So I started to see, okay, what is the quality of how do you create these environments so people don't come in and network superficially and leave?
Yep.
How do you create a space where we can experience something together and then possibly meet your next best friend?
Wow. And is this by invitation only, or can people get details, follow your socials or something? If you're organizing something like that, they can.
So it's currently in the works. Therefore, whatever details are in John's description down there I've been workshopping but I mean, I've been piloting these experiences through pop-up cities, through pop-up events, and now I just have to hit publish. It is in the works.
Yeah, we'll put that more information when you have that. We'll put it on the show notes and all that kind of stuff. But Mel, Melissa, it's been wonderful. Incredibly grateful for your friendship as well as your generosity for being here on this show. I really appreciated our conversation together today.
No, thank you for being such a great friend and for demonstrating what a true friendship can be.
Well, everybody, thank you for tuning in to this episode. If this meant something to you, it was helpful in any way, I would like to ask you to like and subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends. Thanks, everybody, and see you next time.